The mining station Zirion 5 floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. Its silver walls caught the light from nearby stars. Inside, Commander Jiwoo walked down a long hallway. His black boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. Behind him, Captain Minji carried a datapad in her hands. Jiwoo stopped at a huge door. It was 3 times taller than any human door. Strange symbols glowed blue on its surface. "Ready for this, Commander?" Minji asked. Jiwoo straightened his uniform. The Krell have controlled this mining sector for 200 years. They've never let anyone else mine here. Today, that changes. The door opened with a deep humming sound. Cold air rushed out. Jiwoo walked into the council chamber without hesitation. The room was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into shadows high above. In the center, a round table made of black stone waited, but what caught Jiwoo's attention were the beings sitting around it. The Krell were unlike anything in the human database. Each one stood 15 feet tall, even while sitting. Their bodies looked like they were made of living crystal. Colors moved under their skin like trapped rainbows. When they breathed, the air itself seemed to shake. Ambassador Nara sat at the head of the table. She was the largest of them all. Her crystal body was deep purple with veins of gold running through. Her face had no human features, just smooth crystal with 2 burning points of light where eyes might be. Jiwoo walked to the empty chair clearly meant for him. It was human-sized and looked tiny next to the Krell seats. He sat down calmly. Minji stood behind him. "Welcome, human," Ambassador Nara said. Her voice sounded like wind chimes and thunder mixed together. "You are Commander Jiwoo of the Terran Exploration Corps." "I am," Jiwoo replied. His voice was steady and clear. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." The Krell around the table shifted. Their crystal bodies made sounds like breaking glass. Jiwoo noticed that waves of energy were coming from them. The air grew thick. The temperature dropped even more. This was the famous Krell intimidation field. Every report said the same thing. No species could stand against it. The psychic energy made other beings feel pure terror. Diplomats from a dozen worlds had run screaming from this very room. Jiwoo felt the energy wash over him. It was like standing in an invisible storm. His skin tingled. The lights in the room seemed to dim. Whispers that weren't really there echoed in his ears. He pulled out his datapad and began reading. "I'd like to discuss mining rights for sectors 7 through 15. Our analysis shows these areas contain valuable minerals that both our species need." The Krell stopped moving. The energy field grew stronger. Now it felt like invisible hands pressing against Jiwoo's chest. The whispers became screams. Shadows moved at the edge of his vision. Minji stepped forward and placed a water bottle on the table next to Jiwoo. She seemed unbothered by the psychic assault. "Commander, you have another meeting in 2 hours," she said quietly. "Thank you, Captain." Jiwoo opened the bottle and took a small sip. He looked back at his datapad. "As I was saying, Sector 7 alone contains enough tritanium to supply both our fleets for the next decade." Ambassador Nara leaned forward. Her crystal body creaked like a tree in a storm. The 2 points of light that served as her eyes burned brighter. You do not flee?" "Flee?" Jiwoo looked up from his datapad. "Why would I flee? We're here to negotiate." The other Krell began making sounds to each other. It was their language, but the translator couldn't process it. The psychic field doubled in strength. Now it was like standing at the bottom of an ocean. The pressure was enormous. Jiwoo rubbed his temples. "Could you reduce the energy field? It's giving me a slight headache, and I'd like to focus on these numbers." The Krell fell silent. In their entire history, no species had ever asked them to reduce the energy field. Most beings couldn't even speak once the field reached half this strength. You feel our presence," Ambassador Nara said slowly. "Yet you sit there. You drink water. You complain of a headache." "Yes," Jiwoo said. "About those mining rights, I believe we can offer a fair trade. Our technology for processing tritanium is more efficient than yours. We could share this technology in exchange for mining access." A younger Krell, his crystal body bright green, slammed a massive hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. This is impossible. No species can resist the Krell presence. You must be using some kind of shielding technology. Jiwoo shook his head. No shields. No technology. We're just here to talk business. He turned to Minji. Captain, could you pull up the efficiency? Reports? Minji activated her datapad. A hologram appeared above the table showing graphs and numbers. She began explaining the data as if they were in a normal business meeting on Earth. The Krell watched in stunned silence. Their psychic field pulsed and swirled. Colors rippled across their crystal bodies, signs of confusion and distress. Ambassador Nara raised one massive hand. The psychic field suddenly focused entirely on Jiwoo. It was like being hit by an invisible hammer. The temperature in the room dropped so low that frost began forming on the table. Jiwoo paused in his reading. He looked directly at Ambassador Nara. Ambassador, I understand this is how the Krell usually begin negotiations, but humans prefer a different approach. Could we skip to the actual discussion? Skip? The word came out like breaking glass. You want us to skip our dominance display? If you don't mind, Jiwoo said politely. We have a lot to cover, and I'd like to reach an agreement that benefits both our species. The green Krell stood up suddenly. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound like nails on metal. This is wrong. All wrong. Fear is the foundation of respect. Without fear, there can be no proper negotiation. Sit down, Counselor Vec, Ambassador Nara commanded. The green Krell slowly sat back down, his crystal body flickering with agitation. Nara turned her attention back to Jiwoo. The psychic field was still at maximum strength. Any other species would be unconscious by now, or dead. Tell me, human, do you feel nothing? No fear at all? Jiwoo considered the question. I feel the energy field, if that's what you mean. It's quite impressive. But fear? He shrugged. I've felt worse during my morning exercises back on Earth. The silence that followed was complete. Even the station's background hum seemed to pause. The Krell stared at the small human sitting, calmly in his chair, sipping water and reviewing mining statistics. Finally, Ambassador Nara spoke. Her voice was different now, uncertain. In 5,000 years, no species has ever... You truly feel no fear? Fear of what? Jiwoo asked genuinely. You haven't threatened us. You haven't attacked. You're just sitting there making the room cold and giving me a mild headache. Now, about Sector 7. The Krell exchanged looks. Their crystal bodies dimmed and brightened in what might have been their equivalent of worried glances. Something was very wrong here. The humans were supposed to be just another young species easily cowed by the Krell's psychic might. But this human sat there like he was in a coffee shop, discussing the weather. Ambassador Nara leaned back in her massive chair. For the first time in her long life, she wondered if the Krell had met something they didn't understand, something that might be far more dangerous than it appeared. The negotiation was not going according to plan. Ambassador Nara stood up slowly from her chair. Her massive crystal body caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. The other Krell watched her with interest. She had led their council for over 300 years. She had made entire civilizations kneel with just a glance, but this human just sat there tapping on his datapad. Commander Jiwoo, she said. Her voice was calm now, but underneath it was something else. Frustration, curiosity. You say you feel our psychic field, yet you show no fear. This is unusual. Jiwoo looked up. Every species is different. Ambassador, humans have our own way of handling stress. Now about those mining rights. No. Nara raised a hand. Her fingers were like crystal spears. Before we discuss business, I must understand what you are. The Krell have ruled this sector through respect, and respect comes from fear. That's an interesting philosophy, Jiwoo said. Humans tend to think respect comes from mutual benefit. But please continue. The other Krell shifted in their seats. Their bodies made soft chiming sounds. They had never heard anyone speak to Ambassador Nara like this. like she was just another person at a meeting. Nara's eyes glowed brighter. You, leave me no choice, I must test you properly. The air in the room changed, it became thick like syrup. The lights dimmed until shadows danced in every corner. Then something else happened. Something that made even the other Krell step back. The room filled with nightmares. Jiwoo blinked as the council chamber vanished. He was no longer sitting at the black stone table. Instead, he stood on Earth. But it wasn't the Earth he knew. The sky was red. Buildings burned in the distance. The ground was covered in ash. "Commander?" Minji's voice came from far away like she was calling through thick fog. Jiwoo looked around the burning landscape. Bodies lay in the streets. Not alien bodies, human ones. Men, women, children. Some wore military uniforms, others wore civilian clothes. All were still and silent. This was an illusion. Jiwoo knew that. The Krell's most powerful weapon, psychic projections that showed a being's worst fears. The images came from the victim's own mind, twisted and magnified until they broke the spirit. A child appeared in front of him. She had dark hair and wide, frightened eyes. "Why didn't you save us?" she asked. Her voice was small and sad. Jiwoo studied the illusion. It was impressive work. Every detail was perfect. The smell of smoke, the heat from the fires, the way the ash fell like snow. "Because you're not real," he said simply. The scene changed. Now he stood in space, watching Earth burn. Massive ships, Krell ships, surrounded the planet. Beams of energy shot down, turning cities to glass. Billions of voices cried out, then went silent. In the real world, Ambassador Nara watched Jiwoo's face. Most beings would be screaming by now. The Vorthan ambassador had lasted 30 seconds before collapsing. The proud Zenith warriors had begged for mercy, but Jiwoo just stood there, hands clasped behind his back. The illusion shifted again. Now Jiwoo was in a small room. The walls were closing in. The ceiling dropped lower and lower. Soon he would be crushed. The walls were so close he could barely breathe. "Interesting," Jiwoo said out loud. "Claustrophobia isn't really one of my issues, but good try." Nara's crystal body flickered with annoyance. She pushed harder. The illusions came faster now, drowning in black water, falling through endless space, watching loved ones die in horrible ways, being eaten alive by creatures with too many teeth. Jiwoo experienced them all. He felt the fear they were meant to create. But something was wrong. The fear didn't overwhelm him, it didn't control him, it just was. "Minji," he called out. "Are you still there?" "Yes, Commander." Her voice was steady. "The Krell are projecting a massive psychic field. Should I call for backup?" "No need. Just keep taking notes. This is valuable data on their capabilities." In the illusion, Jiwoo now faced himself. But this other Jiwoo was dying. Radiation sickness. His skin fell off in patches, his hair was gone. Blood ran from his eyes. "We all die eventually," Jiwoo said to his dying self. "The question is what we do before then." The illusion screamed and vanished. Now Jiwoo stood in complete darkness. Not just dark, absolute absence of light. The kind of darkness that made you doubt your own existence. Whispers came from everywhere and nowhere. They spoke of failure, of worthlessness, of the meaninglessness of human life in the vast universe. "Ambassador," Jiwoo said calmly, "I appreciate the demonstration, but could we return to the negotiations? I'd like to finish our business today." The darkness shattered like glass. Jiwoo was back in the council chamber. He sat in his chair, hands folded on the table. Minji stood behind him, still taking notes on her datapad. The Krell stared at him in complete silence. Ambassador Nara's crystal body had changed color. The deep purple was now shot through with veins of red, a sign of extreme emotion. "Impossible," she whispered. "I showed you the destruction of your world, the death of your species, your own mortality. Yet you sit there like someone who's seen worse?" Jiwoo suggested. Ambassador, your illusions are very creative, but they're still just pictures in my mind. I know they're not real. But the fear is real. The green Krell, Counselor Vec, burst out. Every being fears something. Pain, death, loss. How can you just ignore it? Jiwoo was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a small, tired smile. Who said I ignored it? The Krell leaned forward. Even Ambassador Nara seemed to hold her breath. I felt every moment of fear your illusions created, Jiwoo continued. The burning earth, the dying children, the crushing walls. I felt it all. But feeling fear and being controlled by fear are two different things. That makes no sense. Vec slammed his hand on the table again. Fear is control. Fear is power. Is it? Jiwoo asked. Then why am I still sitting here? The question hung in the air like smoke. The Krell had no answer. In their entire history, fear had always meant control. If you could make someone afraid, you owned them. It was the foundation of their empire. Ambassador Nara sat down slowly. Her massive form settled into the chair with surprising grace. You felt the fear, yet you did not run. You did not beg. You did not break. She paused. What are you, human? Jiwoo picked up his datapad again. I'm a negotiator trying to establish mining rights. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, as I was saying, Sector 7 has significant tritanium deposits. Stop. Nara's voice was different now. Quieter, uncertain. I must know. How do you resist? Is it technology? Training? Some quirk of human biology? Jiwoo exchanged a glance with Minji. She gave a tiny nod. It's none of those things, Jiwoo said. It's just experience. Nara repeated the word like it was in an alien language. Experience with what? Jiwoo's smile was gentle now, almost sad. With fear itself, Ambassador. Real fear. Not illusions or psychic projections. The kind of fear that comes from actual danger, actual loss, actual pain. Humans have a long history with that kind of fear. The Krell were silent. Their crystal bodies had dimmed, as if they were conserving energy. Or thinking very hard about something they'd never considered before. But that's impossible, Vec said finally. His voice was smaller now. No species can survive true fear. It breaks them. That's why our projections work. We show them their fears and they crumble. Maybe, Jiwoo said. Or maybe some species learn to live with their fears instead of running from them. Ambassador Nara stared at Jiwoo for a long moment. Then she did something no Krell had ever done in a negotiation. She asked a real question. The council chamber fell into the deepest silence it had ever known. Even the constant hum of the station's engines seemed to fade away. The Krell sat frozen in their chairs, their crystal bodies dim and still. They were waiting for something they had never waited for before, an explanation from a lesser species. Ambassador Nara's question hung in the air. How? Jiwoo set down his datapad. For the first time since entering the room, he gave the Krell his complete attention. Minji stepped forward slightly, ready to support her commander. Before I answer, Jiwoo said, I need to understand something. In all your years of ruling this sector, has any species ever asked you why you use fear? The Krell exchanged glances. Colors rippled across their crystal surfaces, confusion mixed with something else. Doubt, perhaps. No, Nara admitted. They accept it. Fear is the natural order. The strong make the weak afraid. This is how the universe works. Is it? Jiwoo leaned back in his small chair. Or is that just how you've made it work? Counselor Vec's green crystal body flared with light. Insolent human. You dare question the Krell way? We have maintained peace in this sector for 5,000 years. Peace through fear, Jiwoo noted. But is that really peace or is it just silence? The room temperature dropped another degree. Frost began forming on the metal parts of the furniture. The Krell's agitation was affecting the environmental controls. Ambassador Nara raised a hand, and Vec fell silent. You speak as if you know, a better way, human. Yet your species is young. You've barely left your home system. What can you teach us about peace? Jiwoo was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. We can teach you about war. The Krell shifted uneasily. This was not the answer they expected. You use fear because it works, Jiwoo continued. It's efficient, clean, bloodless. You've never needed to fight because everyone surrenders at the first touch of your psychic field. But humans, we've had to fight. Not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice. Every species fights, another Krell said. This one had a blue crystalline form. It proves nothing. Does every species almost destroy itself? Jiwoo asked. Multiple times? The Krell were silent. Minji stepped forward and activated her datapad. A hologram appeared above the table. Earth, beautiful and blue, floating in space. This is our world, Jiwoo said. It looks peaceful, doesn't it? But that peace was earned, paid for with blood and tears and countless lives. The hologram changed. Now it showed mushroom clouds rising over cities. Nuclear fire consuming everything. We split the atom, Jiwoo said simply, and then we pointed it at each other. We came within minutes of ending our own civilization, not once, not twice, but dozens of times during what we call the Cold War. The Krell watched the images in silence. Their species had developed nuclear technology too, but they had never used it on themselves. The hologram shifted again. Now it showed trenches filled with soldiers, gas clouds drifting across battlefields, men dying in mud and wire. Before that, we had other wars. World wars, we called them. Millions died. Entire generations lost. We created weapons so terrible that we scared ourselves. But you survived, Nara said slowly. We did. And each time we learned, not how to avoid fear, but how to live with it, how to function despite it, how to choose hope even when terror was all around us. The hologram changed once more. Now it showed plague sweeping across continents, hospitals overflowing, scientists working desperately in laboratories. Disease has nearly wiped us out several times. The Black Death killed a third of Europe. The Spanish flu, COVID-19, the Martian fever. Each time we thought it might be the end. But we adapted. We learned. We survived. Counselor Vec leaned forward. You're saying your resistance to fear comes from suffering? From surviving suffering, Jiwoo corrected. From facing real terror and coming out the other side. Your psychic projections are powerful, Ambassador, but they're still just shadows compared to what humanity has actually experienced. The blue Krell spoke up. But this makes no sense. Trauma creates fear, not resistance to it. Minji smiled slightly. Not always. Sometimes trauma creates resilience. Sometimes facing your worst nightmare teaches you that nightmares can be survived. Jiwoo nodded. When you've seen your cities burn, really burn, not in an illusion, a psychic projection of burning cities loses its power. When you've watched loved ones die from disease, held their hands as they slipped away, a mental image of death becomes just that, an image. Ambassador Nara's form shifted, colors swirling beneath her crystal surface. You're saying we have been using a weapon that cannot work on you because you've already experienced worse? Not just experienced, Jiwoo said. Survived, overcome, learned from. Every horror you showed me, humanity has faced a version of it, and we're still here. The Krell were struggling with this concept. Their entire worldview was based on fear as the ultimate tool of control. The idea that a species could become immune to fear through exposure to real terror was revolutionary. But surely, Vec said, his voice uncertain now, surely something must frighten you. Something must make you run. Jiwoo considered this. Of course things frighten us. We're not fearless. We feel fear every day. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. But we've learned something your species seems to have missed. And what is that? Nara asked. That fear is just an emotion, like joy or anger or sadness. It comes and goes. It doesn't have to control you unless you let it. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not the silence of shock, but of deep thought. The Krell were processing something that challenged everything they believed. Finally, Ambassador Nara spoke. "Show me." Jiwoo raised an eyebrow. "Show you what?" "Show me this. Resilience. Make me understand how a species can face its worst fears and not break." Jiwoo looked at Minji. She nodded and began typing on her datapad. The hologram above the table changed again. Now it showed human history, but not the wars and plagues. It showed what came after. Cities rebuilt from rubble, vaccines developed, peace treaties signed, humans working together after catastrophes, children playing in parks where battles once raged. "This is what you're missing," Jiwoo said softly. "The other side of fear. The part where you get back up, where you rebuild, where you choose to trust again, even after betrayal, where you choose to hope again, even after despair." The Krell watched the images in fascination. They had conquered worlds, but they had never rebuilt them. They had instilled fear, but they had never helped anyone overcome it. "Your way works," Jiwoo continued, "but it's limited. Fear can make people obey, but it can't make them create. It can't make them innovate. It can't make them truly cooperate. For that, you need something else." "What?" Nara asked, and for the first time, she sounded genuinely curious rather than challenging. "Trust, respect, mutual benefit, the knowledge that we're stronger together than apart." Counselor Vex's crystal form flickered. "But without fear, how do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos?" Jiwoo smiled. "With great difficulty. It's messy, complicated, sometimes it fails, but when it works, it creates something fear never can. And what is that? True allies, real partners, relationships based on choice, not coercion." Ambassador Nara stood up slowly. Her massive form towered over the table, but somehow she seemed less imposing than before. "You said you could teach us about war, but you're teaching us about peace." "They're two sides of the same coin," Jiwoo replied. "You can't understand one without the other. Your species has known neither. Only the threat of war, the illusion of peace." The Krell fell silent again. But this time, the silence was full of possibility. Ambassador Nara looked down at the small human who had shaken the foundations of her worldview. And for the first time in her long life, she asked the question that would change everything. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" Jiwoo met her gaze steadily. "Now that," he said, "is the right question. And the answer might make your blood run cold." Ambassador Nara's question echoed through the chamber. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" Jiwoo stood up from his chair. He walked to the center of the room, his footsteps steady and calm. The Krell watched him with intense focus. Their crystal bodies had dimmed to almost nothing, like candles burning low. "To answer that," Jiwoo said, "I need to tell you about my grandmother." The Krell shifted, confused. They had expected talk of military training or advanced technology, not family stories. "Her name was Hee-jin," Jiwoo continued. "She lived through the Korean War when she was just a child. She saw her village burned. She lost her parents. She walked hundreds of miles through winter mountains with nothing but the clothes on her back." Minji moved closer, her datapad showing images of war-torn Korea from over a century ago. The pictures were in black and white, showing destroyed buildings and refugee columns. "She was 7 years old," Jiwoo said. 7. And she survived things that would break most adults: starvation, disease, the constant fear of death. She told me once that she learned to sleep while walking because stopping meant freezing to death. Ambassador Nara's voice was soft. "This is tragic, but how does it answer my question?" Jiwoo smiled sadly. "Because of what happened next. She survived. She grew up. She rebuilt her life from nothing, and when I was young, she would hold me during thunderstorms and tell me, 'Fear is like the storm, little one. It comes, it rages, but it always passes. We just have to hold on until it does.'" The room was completely quiet now. Even the station's systems seemed to have hushed. "She taught me that fear isn't the enemy," Jiwoo went on. Fear is just a warning system. It tells us danger is near. But she also taught me that we get to choose what we do with that warning. Choose? Counselor Vec asked. How can you choose when fear overwhelms everything? Jiwoo turned to face him. Because humans have been choosing for thousands of years. We chose to leave our caves despite the predators outside. We chose to sail unknown oceans despite the fear of falling off the edge of the world. We chose to fly, to go to space, to split the atom, all despite our fears. Minji added quietly. We call it courage. Not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. But your fears, the ones I showed you, they were absolute. Nara protested. The end of your world. The death of everyone you love. How can courage matter against that? Jiwoo's expression grew serious. Because we've faced those fears before. Not in illusions, but in reality. And we're still here. He walked back to the hologram display. New images appeared. Concentration camps, atomic bombs, mass graves, pandemic wards, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, the Black Death, the climate wars. Each time someone, somewhere, thought it was the end of everything. And each time, humans found a way to continue. Not because we weren't afraid, but because we were afraid and kept going anyway. The Blue Krell spoke up. You're saying your entire species is traumatized? No, Jiwoo said firmly. We're experienced. There's a difference. Trauma breaks you. Experience teaches you. And humanity has had a lot of teachers. He gestured to the images. My grandmother wasn't broken by her experiences. She was shaped by them. She became a doctor. She saved lives. She had children and grandchildren. She turned her fear into fuel for living. Ambassador Nara's crystal form pulsed with soft light. But how? How do you turn fear into fuel? Jiwoo thought for a moment. Let me ask you something, Ambassador. What do you fear? The question caught Nara off guard. No one had ever asked a Krell about their fears. They were the ones who created fear, not felt it. We don't. She started, then stopped. Everyone fears something, Jiwoo said gently. Even the mighty Krell. Perhaps you fear losing control. Perhaps you fear being vulnerable. Perhaps you fear that without your psychic abilities, other species would see you as you really are. The Krell recoiled as if struck. Jiwoo had hit close to home. The difference, Jiwoo continued, is what you do with that fear. You've used it as a weapon, projecting it onto others. Humans learn to face it, understand it, and ultimately master it. Master fear? Vec laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. Impossible. Is it? Jiwoo asked. Then let me tell you about the first humans in space. They sat on top of controlled explosions, in tiny metal cans, knowing that the slightest error meant death. They were terrified. Their hearts raced. Their hands shook, but they went anyway. Minji pulled up images of early space missions. Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, said his heart was beating so hard he thought it might burst. But he also said, "The Earth is blue. How wonderful." It is amazing. They transformed their fear into wonder, Jiwoo added, into achievement, into progress. That's what humans do. We don't ignore fear. We don't succumb to it. We use it. Ambassador Nara was leaning forward now, her massive form bent toward the small human. But your psychic projection defenses, surely you must have developed something. We did, Jiwoo interrupted. But not technology. We developed perspective. Perspective? Jiwoo nodded. Your illusions showed me Earth burning, but I've seen videos of Earth actually burning. During the climate wars, during the nuclear exchange of 2089. I know what real destruction looks like. Your projection was just a pale copy. He continued, You showed me loved ones dying, but I've been to funerals. I've said goodbye to people I care about. I know that grief is survivable, even when it feels like it isn't. The Krell were silent, processing this information. Their entire power structure was based on the assumption that fear was absolute, that their projections were irresistible. "You want to know why I'm not afraid?" Jiwoo said, his voice strong and clear. "It's not because I'm brave. It's not because I'm special. It's because I'm human. And humans have looked into the abyss so many times that we've learned to see past it." "See past it to what?" Nara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To tomorrow," Jiwoo replied. "To hope. To the possibility that things can be better. Fear shows us what might go wrong. Hope shows us what might go right. And humans have learned to hold both in our minds at the same time." He walked back to his chair and sat down. "Your species mastered the creation of fear. Mine mastered the overcoming of it. That's why your psychic projections don't work on us. We've already faced every fear you can imagine, and we've learned that on the other side of fear is just life, continuing on." The chamber fell silent again. The Krell sat motionless, their crystal forms dim and thoughtful. Everything they believed about power, about control, about the nature of the universe itself, was being questioned. Finally, Ambassador Nara spoke. Her voice was different now, smaller, uncertain, almost vulnerable. "If fear doesn't control you," she asked, "then what does?" Jiwoo smiled. It was a warm smile, full of understanding. "Nothing controls us, Ambassador. That's the point. We choose. Every day we choose. Despite our fears, because of our fears, through our fears, we choose to go on. That's what makes us human." The Krell ambassador stared at the small human sitting calmly in his chair, and for the first time in her long life, she felt something she had only ever inflicted on others. She felt a chill run through her crystal form, but it wasn't fear of Jiwoo or his species. It was fear of a truth she was only beginning to understand. Ambassador Nara stood up slowly. Her crystal form seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than when the meeting began. The other Krell watched her, waiting. They had never seen their leader like this, uncertain, shaken, questioning everything. "Commander." "Jiwoo," she said, her voice quiet. "You have shown us something we did not expect, something we feared to see." Jiwoo tilted his head. "What did you fear, Ambassador?" Nara's crystal body flickered with pale colors. "That we might be wrong, that our way, the way of the Krell for 5,000 years, might be built on a lie." The other Krell made sounds of distress. Their bodies chimed and rang like broken bells. To question the Krell way was unthinkable. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. "Not a lie," Jiwoo said gently. "Just an incomplete truth. Fear does have power. You've proven that with countless species, but it's not the only power, and it's not the strongest power." "Then what is?" Counselor Vec demanded, his green crystal form pulsed with agitation. "If not fear, what force can unite the galaxy? What can maintain order?" Minji stepped forward. "May I?" she asked Jiwoo. He nodded. She activated her datapad again. This time the hologram showed something different. Not war or destruction, but cooperation. Humans and various alien species working together, building, creating, exploring. "This is the Terran Alliance," Minji explained. 12 species working together, not because they fear us, but because they choose to, because we offer something better than fear. "Better?" Nara repeated. "What could be better than perfect control?" "Imperfect. Partnership," Jiwoo answered. "It's messier, harder, sometimes it fails. But when it works, it creates something fear never can. Willing cooperation, innovation, trust." The blue Krell leaned forward. "But without fear, why would anyone follow rules? Why would the weak respect the strong?" Jiwoo smiled. "Who says they're weak? Who says we're strong? Those are your definitions based on who can make others afraid. But what if strength means something else?" "Like what?" Vec challenged. "Like the strength to admit when you're wrong, the strength to change, the strength to see others as equals even when they're different, the strength to build instead of destroy." The room fell quiet again. The Krell were struggling with these concepts, Their entire society was based on hierarchy, on the powerful dominating the powerless through fear. Ambassador Nara moved closer to Jiwoo's small chair. Even sitting, she towered over him. You humans, you truly feel no need to dominate others? Jiwoo laughed, a short, sad sound. Oh, we feel it, we've done it. Our history is full of attempts at domination, empires, colonies, oppression. We've made every mistake you can imagine. But we learned, Jiwoo continued. Slowly, painfully. We learned that domination always fails in the end, that fear always breeds resistance, that empires built on oppression always fall. He stood up and faced Nara directly. You've ruled through fear for 5,000 years, impressive. But the Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years. The British Empire lasted 300. The Solar Confederation lasted 500. All fell. All are now just chapters in history books. You're saying our empire will fall? Nara's voice carried a note of anger now. I'm saying it doesn't have to, Jiwoo replied calmly. You have a choice. You can continue ruling through fear until someone finds a way to resist it, as we have, or you can choose to change, to evolve, to lead through something other than terror. The Krell exchanged glances. Their crystal bodies flickered and pulsed with rapid conversation in their own language, sounds, like wind chimes in a storm. Finally, Nara spoke. And if we choose to change? What then? How do we lead without fear? Jiwoo sat back down. That's the hard part. It's easier to destroy than to build. Easier to frighten than to inspire. But the rewards... He smiled. The rewards are beyond anything fear can achieve. Show us, Nara said simply. Jiwoo nodded to Minji. She pulled up new images. Human colonies thriving alongside alien settlements. Joint research stations discovering new technologies. Art and culture being shared across species lines. The Vrixi were our first allies, Jiwoo explained. They're a small species physically weak by most standards. We could have conquered them easily. Instead, we offered partnership. They had brilliant minds for mathematics. We had engineering expertise. Together, we solved problems neither could handle alone. More images appeared. The Zalathi taught us about sustainable agriculture. We taught them about music. The Korvani showed us new ways to navigate space. We showed them how to laugh. They'd never developed humor in their culture. Ambassador Nara watched the images with fascination. And they stay with you willingly? Without coercion? They stay because they want to, Jiwoo confirmed. Because their lives are better with us than without us. Because we make them stronger and they make us stronger. It's not perfect. We disagree. We argue. Sometimes we fail. But we keep trying. Why? Vec asked. Why keep trying when fear is so much simpler? Because simple isn't always better, Jiwoo answered. And because the alternative, endless fear, endless control, endless isolation, is no way to live, for the controller or the controlled. Ambassador. Nara turned to look at her fellow Krell. They had been silent, watching, learning. Now they waited for her to speak. To decide. She turned back to Jiwoo. You came here for mining rights. I did. If we give them to you, will you teach us? Will you show us this other way? The question hung in the air. This was not what Jiwoo had expected. He had come for a simple business negotiation. Now he was being asked to help reshape an ancient civilization. It's not something we can just teach, he said carefully. It's something you have to choose. Every day, every interaction, every decision. The choice to trust instead of frighten, to cooperate instead of dominate, to see others as partners instead of subjects. But will you help us try? Nara asked. For the first time, her voice held something that sounded like hope. Jiwoo stood up again. He extended his hand toward the massive crystal being. It was a human gesture, one the Krell had never seen before. Partners help each other, he said simply. Ambassador Nara looked at the small hand extended toward her. Such a simple gesture. But behind it lay a philosophy that could change everything. Slowly, carefully, she extended one of her crystal appendages. It was like a spear made of living glass, sharp and deadly, but she touched it gently to Jiwoo's palm. The moment of contact sent ripples through both beings. Not psychic attack, not fear, but something else. Understanding. Possibility. The first, fragile thread of trust. Partners. Nara agreed. The other Krell watched in amazement as their leader, the being who had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, took her first step toward a different future. Jiwoo smiled. Now about those mining rights. The negotiation that followed was unlike any in Krell history. There were no demands, no threats, no displays of power. Instead, there was discussion, compromise, mutual benefit. And when it was over, when the agreements were signed, Ambassador Nara asked one more question. The answer you gave, she said. About why you aren't afraid? Was that the truth that would make my blood run cold? Jiwoo paused at the door, Minji beside him. He turned back to face the Krell ambassador. No, he said quietly. The truth that made your blood run cold was the realization that humans aren't special. Any species can learn what we learned. Any species can overcome fear, which means our empire was always fragile, Nara finished. Built on sand, one strong wind away from collapse. Jiwoo nodded. But now you have a chance to build something better, something that will last. Not because others fear you, but because they respect you. Because they choose you. As the humans left the council chamber, the Krell sat in thoughtful silence. Their world had changed in the span of a single meeting. Their future was uncertain now, but also full of possibility. And for the first time in 5,000 years, they faced that future not with fear, but with hope. Ambassador Nara looked at the signed agreements on the table. Mining rights were just the beginning. The real negotiation, the transformation of the Krell civilization was only starting. But they had taken the first step. And that, as the humans had taught them, was how every journey began.